I know that this is going to come off as being a bit out in the weeds, but it's been on my mind for a while now, and I feel compelled to speak on it. Let's talk about global warming. Now, this is a subject that at its core revolves around white supremacy. It should be blatantly obvious that it does, though to some people they may not necessarily understand the connecting tissue. After all, when the hell have you ever heard me talk about global warming? Well, the debate about climate change has been dominated by an argument that at its root, what is the cause? What are the root causes of climate change? Well, our researchers at theblackchannel.net have been doing their own groundbreaking study, and they have identified the cause of global warming. Now, the scientific term that's being used is DW-FOT. That's DW-FOT, which stands for Dim White Folks Over There. In a nutshell, that's the cause, the root cause of global warming, and it's also the reason why you're not seeing anything being done about it. The debates go around in circles, kind of like the gun debate. You want to know why the NRA is so successful? Because white folks are looking at their guns and going, but this is how we're going to keep the niggers in line, and this is how we're ultimately going to get rid of them. So it becomes a circular argument when you start talking about gun control. White people think that they're getting something out of stockpiling all of those ballistic weapons. Well, to the extent that there was a debate regarding global warming, that should have been settled this year. 2017, in case you've been hiding inside of a meat locker, you know that this year has been the hottest winter in human history, and that should be a contradiction in terms, but not anymore. You have had an entire winter where nearly nationwide, especially south of the Midwest, we're not even talking about south of the Mason-Dixon line, the traditional American South, where you're not used to getting snowfall every year, though usually every third or fourth year you are. And yet this year, south of the Midwest, you've had temperatures in the 70s and 80s consistently. And the last couple of months, which are supposed to be the heart of winter, there's barely been a winter at all. Many parts of the country were in a perpetual, Indian summer for much of the last 3 months. And many other parts of the country simply didn't have a winter altogether. Now, last year, old President Tangerine, back when he was a candidate, he was crowing nonstop, throwing red meat to his brain-dead base about how global warming was a myth because it snowed in New York City. I guess it skipped his notice that the snowfall was less than in years past. Donald Trump always seems to be the last one to know. But for the first time, the city of Chicago had no snow at all for both January and February. And that's not merely unprecedented for this year. That's unprecedented in the city of Chicago's entire 146-year-long history. Ever since the city of Chicago has existed, there has always been snow in the Windy City. That is one of the big things, one of the big problems that Chicago faces annually, snowfall. And it's no laughing matter, by the way. Politicians have lost their jobs due to the snow. I'm being serious, by the way. One of the most famous cases in Chicago was Mayor Blandick. Back in 1979, he got voted out of office after a massive snowfall hit the city, and he failed to get the city's snow cleaning equipment on the streets. No matter how much of a nice guy Mayor Blandick was, and he was liked, believe it or not, it didn't change the fact that the most important thing weather-wise in Chicago ain't rainfall and ain't the heat, at least not until now, it's snowfall. Michael Blandick became a political casualty of Old Man Winter. So when I talk about Chicago not having snowfall, that is unprecedented. That was big news in Chicago Unfortunately, it didn't seem to be big news anywhere else. Now, as much time and energy as the white right has devoted to Chicago, you'd think that at least one of them might have noticed that America's third most populous city didn't have any snowfall for 2 freaking months in the middle of the year when Chicago is famous for its snowfall. Well, more than likely they of course did notice, but that's probably why they've suddenly lost interest in Chicago all of a sudden. After Donald Trump's insipid little tweet about sending the National Guard, well, they'll have no problem getting into the city without snow to hinder their incursion. And this year, President Tangerine's typical mocking of climate change has been nowhere to be seen. In fact, none of the Republicans or the right wing are making fun of climate change anymore. Gee, I wonder why. But it's not just Chicago that didn't have any snow this year. You've had a host of other cities that traditionally have had record snowfall, and this year they've had historic high temperatures. This is nationwide. Ordinarily, this would have dominated the headlines, but the pure chaos coming out of Washington these days has led the news instead. Perhaps the white media thought that the record heat was all coming from the hot air emanating from Donald Trump's mouth. They can be forgiven for that assumption. It's so ironic, isn't it? The world is burning up because of white supremacy's insane efforts to try to freeze it the way that it was 250 years ago, and that's at the core of all this. The denial, the scapegoating, the excuse-making. The reason that they find it so easy to look an environmental catastrophe in the eye and just dismiss it is because survival is not the most important thing to the dominant society. Dominance is. That's what your pal Richard Spencer told you, remember? White supremacy dominates the world, and that includes both the industrial and scientific spheres. When you look at America's universities, what do you see? Bastions of white privilege and white primacy. And what do you expect to come out of such places? Well, what's not going to come out of it is a robust group of individuals who are going to be able to effectively speak against the status quo. The universities, like the government, like the businesses, like the media, they exist to support white supremacy, not to challenge it. That's the reason why all of these armchair academics and all of these world-class scholars haven't been able to make a dent in this debate. They're going against the grain. They seem to forget that the white universities are able to pay their salaries directly from the proceeds of white supremacy that largely comes from industrialists whose families make huge endowments to these universities. White supremacy has created paradigms that were meant to expedite their exploitation of the Earth's resources that they've stolen. And these systems were monopolies, are monopolies, because there's nothing the dominant society hates more than competition. Not from one another, and certainly not from black people. But you know, they've committed a sin that's a hell of a lot worse than not allowing anyone else to set up parallel industries to theirs. They have also prohibited the manufacture, or in many cases, merely the development of systems that could rival or replace their own. This is not just about making sure that nobody else gets to set up their own oil corporations. This is about making sure that no competing industries get to come into the world. Why don't you Google who killed the electric car if you want a case study in how white supremacy made it a point to crush anything that threatened the status quo, even from other white people. The classic rivalry between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, that's another one that you might want to look up. White people set up these little paradigms and they become suicidal, but they also become impossible to change because white supremacy draws its sustenance from entrenched power. It's not about adaptation for them. They've never had to adapt, and they'll be damned if they're going to start now. They're going to tell themselves why we're comfortable, while Rome and Chicago and D.C. and Miami and St. Louis and Minneapolis burn, literally. down in Louisiana, TBA's neck of the woods, Hurricane Katrina was supposed to be what they called a once-in-a-100-year storm. Well, in the last 12 years, Louisiana's had about 4 such storms. Baton Rouge, Louisiana's capital, had record flooding this year. And California's been about in the same state. So it seems these once-in-a-100-year storms are showing up once every 4 years now. This is the price that the nation and the world are being made to pay as the result of white supremacy, because it's white supremacy that brought all of this on us. The industries that are creating the greenhouse gases that are causing all of this meteorological havoc, they are the engines that power white supremacy. And the proceeds that they've garnered from these industries have been used to pay for armies and to bribe officials in order to freeze the world exactly at the point when they had taken over much of it and come to oppress most of the world's population. That's what the whole mad scheme has been, and that's the reason why they won't listen to reason and cannot be made to listen to reason. And the white power brokers, the robber barons, the captains of industry, they could give less than a damn about the environment. Same way they could give less than a damn about the extinction of entire species. What happened to the American buffalo? The white man happened. That's what happened. Protecting the environment would cost money. And as these good white businessmen have proved with slavery, they would fight wars just to save themselves a few dollars. Returning to Louisiana, what happened with British Petroleum and the explosion of Deepwater Horizon? What happened was a $150,000 regulator was what happened. Because they refused to do regular maintenance that would have cost them a mere $150,000 for a corporation that makes billions per month. They were determined that they weren't going to spend $150,000. Now, what does that tell you? This goes beyond penny wise, pound foolish. This is a group of individuals who are showing you that a mental disorder is at work. An unchangeable, incurable mental disorder. They had a choice between making billions or trying to money grub $150,000, and they say, we'll take the $150,000. Now, what does that tell you? Obviously, the money means something more than mere monetary value to them. That money represents something to them greater than their survival, and what it represents is their stranglehold on the world. Give up a little bit for their own survival? No thanks. This is what you're up against, black man and black woman. White supremacy destroys everything that it touches. People, civilizations, rivers, fertile plains, the earth itself. Right now, white supremacy has the world in its grip. And we're seeing the catastrophic results. The whole world has been forced to become a perverted macrocosm of the sick ideology that currently dominates it. And we, the world's rightful stewards, we've been reduced to a stature of mere bystanders to all of this true carnage. Donald Trump ought to look out the window and see what's happening, what he and his fellow white supremacists are doing if he wants to see American carnage. White supremacy has trained the people who benefit from it to close their ears to the truth. That's their favorite posture. Hands over their ears, la la la. They'll do that right up until the moment that they die. They have trained themselves to deny how destructive their behavior is, as individuals and as a group, at the local level and globally. And this is doubly true when talking about the very industrial magnates, the men who run the heavy industries, whose control of the resources and the wealth that it produces provides the fuel that powers the machine of white supremacy. The strength of white supremacy is based on the power of its economy. From the moment that they were able to get through the Moorish blockade and finally get out of Europe, their single-minded goal has been to capitalize upon and dominate the world's resources, to monopolize the world's resources, and to lock everyone else out of the resources of the very ground that they stand on. Now, I've always told you that the working definition of economics is the system by which resources are distributed. It is through their industrialists that the dominant society has captured the world's resources and monopolizes not only the way in which the resources are used, but who is allowed to benefit from those resources. When the Europeans went into South Africa, all those wars that they fought there, it was mostly at the behest of the mineral and petroleum interests back in Europe who coveted Africa's unparalleled natural resources. From the Kimberley diamond mines to whatever, that's what it was about. Did you know that the world's largest oil refinery is in South Africa? Did you know that? Heavy industry is what powers any nation's prosperity. But you can't have heavy industries unless you first control the resources necessary to sustain those industries. That's the reason why Japan was on their imperial march for the better part of 60 some odd years. They wanted natural resources, and they were determined to take them from their Asian brethren. And that's where the enforcement arm of white supremacy, the military, comes in. You know about the domestic enforcement arm of white supremacy, the police, but the global enforcement arm is the military. When there's something that they want, they send in the Marines. This is how they got the world, and this is how they intend to keep it. And they're going to amuse themselves with all the creature comforts that they get from poisoning the planet on all levels, watching as those whose lands they've stolen have entire islands and shorelines eroded away, but that's okay. The white folks think that they're going to barricade themselves behind a wall of paper, money, and that's going to preserve them somehow. This is the delusion that they're under. And not even one of their academics can talk sense to them. We're talking about fellow white people here, trying to say, hey, there's a problem here, but they won't listen. As far as they're concerned, hey, this is what we did all of this genocide for, so we could kick up our heels. And we could go ahead and enjoy a few creature comforts while the world burns. Might as well live it up. Tomorrow we die at our own hands, but death nonetheless. See, the worst aspect of this ongoing control of the world by white supremacy is that they have successfully imprinted their sick mentality on much of the world. What was it Dr. John Henrik Clarke said? The first thing that every colonizer has to do is to find a way to colonize the minds of those who they are oppressing. And they've done it. These good white folks, they have glamorized their suicidal lifestyle. Jet setting on jets that pollute the environment. They're sitting here praising the industries that poison the rivers and the land and make it where you can't even live in these places. And they glamorize it through their movies and television. They have magazines that glamorize it. The white media lionizes and canonizes and beatifies and anything else you want to say these rapists of the environment, these ecological plunderers, puts them on a pedestal and gets the rest of the world to say, hey, we should aspire to that. And so they have. White supremacy, the dominant society, they have set a horrifying example. And worse than that, they have convinced the majority of the people on this planet that the white way is the right way. They don't think about the impact of their actions, and they've gotten the rest of the world to think, hey, we shouldn't think about the impact of ours either. Rather than look for or even ask about other ways to generate energy or to refine natural resources or to produce industrial goods, instead the world is letting the white powers that be sweet-talk them with what they all know to be lies about how global warming isn't real, and even if it is, it's probably just a natural warming trend caused by the sun. Let me tell you something. In nature, everything happens slowly. But on the few occasions when something happens suddenly, it's never a good thing. When you're outside and you see storm clouds forming and the temperature drops suddenly, you know that some freaking hell is about to break loose, usually a tornado. That's what happens when a rush of cold air, a cold weather system comes into the area suddenly and meets warm air. That never has a happy ending. Whenever there's an earthquake, the tectonic plates move quickly. When that happens, entire cities get destroyed. Nothing that happens in nature suddenly is a good thing. So if you're having a warming trend that's happened suddenly, that doesn't smell right to anyone. The world's industrialists have signed on to the devil's bargain of white supremacy. Hell, they're the ones who supplied the ink for that little contract. The world has largely become envious of the wealth that the white minority have, but none of these non-white groups in their fit of envy and jealousy have stopped to remember that all the wealth that white people have was largely stolen from them. You are literally allowing white supremacy to bribe you with your own money. The developing world is trying to follow in the Europeans' footsteps. They should know what the folly of that is from the jump, because by doing so, they turn an environmental disaster into an irreparable catastrophe. That's what we're looking at. And this is why I have no desire to ally myself with the Asians. The Chinese and the Indians are sitting here trying to industrialize along white lines, and never mind the fact that it's suicidal, you can do something better by getting away from the European model. They refuse to see what white supremacy is doing to the world, or rather they see it. Hell, they go to the UN and complain about it, but they don't care. So they're being just as hypocritical as their white role models. They suffer from the same don't think about tomorrow mentality as their white ideological pals. So the same way that we keep telling you that you're not going to be making friends with all of these groups, you're not going to be planning for a future with them either. They're going to be part of the forces of antagonism that you're going to have to contest with. And that's fine as long as you're willing to see the reality and act intelligently upon it. See, these other groups, even at this late date, even with the stakes this high, as dire as the consequences have already proven themselves to be, these other non-white groups, they just refuse to understand that white supremacy is a con. It's not inaccurate. It's not merely misleading. It is a con. It is a lie. It is a fraud. Always has been, always will be. You can't change it. You can't rehabilitate it. You can't clean it up. And you can't fix it either. Everything in it and everything about it has been used to support that con. It doesn't matter if it's fossil fuels or frankenfood. They don't think because this is not about thought. It is about control. But now white supremacy has gone way beyond mere injustice, or even genocide for that matter. White supremacy has become a global suicide pact. The rank and file white people who have made it a habit to vote against their best interests, they may think that they're getting something out of all this. Well, the truth is they are. They're getting extinction. And since they depend on white supremacy for everything they have, I'm sure that they figure that they're fully prepared to die for white supremacy. But the sad truth is, they're just gonna die, period. White supremacy is about raping the world. And if you've benefited from white supremacy, then pat yourself on the back. You are one of these global rapists. White supremacy rapes the world's people. It rapes the world's culture, and it rapes the world itself. And the same way that they exterminated the Tasmanians and didn't bat an eyelash, they now have coldly calculated how they are going to exterminate all life on the planet. And in their minds, we're going to kill the world and have a good time doing it. And don't bother trying to get them to turn away from this course, because truth be told, they don't know any other thing to do. You have a lot of white so-called liberal multimillionaires and billionaires, but did you notice that when the Citizens United ruling was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, none of these good white liberals who claim to be so left-leaning thought to get together and try to propose congressional legislation that would effectively neutralize it? To author some legislation that would unequivocally make it where something like money as political speech would be neutralized and eliminated. Notice how they didn't do that, and notice how they haven't raised a stink about it. Now, what does that tell you? What it should tell you is that there's a big difference between what white people say they want and then what they actually go out in the world and do. They haven't had a problem with it at all. At the end of the day, they're cut from the same cloth. They're all operating out of the same playbook. When Richard Spencer gave his ridiculous praise for white people saying that they were conquerors, etc., he was accurately speaking for the vast majority of white people on the planet. Now, while most of them are just discreet enough not to say these things out loud, or at least not to say it in mixed company, they all subscribe to that basic belief that the white identity is to conquer. Well, you can't be a conqueror unless you have someone or something that you are subjugating. That's what conquest is about. And this is the foundation of their self-image. You can't be white without conquering someone or something. That's the reason why peace has always eluded them. When they look in the mirror, they see a conqueror. And if you're a conqueror, that means you can never be at peace. You're always looking to subdue or conquer something or someone. Now, we recognize them as genocidal racists out to destroy the world and leave a dead husk of a planet in their wake, but as they see it, they're daring adventurers, risk-takers. What's that old saying? A white man's heaven is a black man's hell. When you look at the world and see how the environment is beginning to crumble under the weight of white supremacy, you see hell on earth. They see heaven, because they can always turn their eyes away from it. To white people, they don't see themselves as raping the planet. They see themselves as on some sort of incredible adventure. Oh, it's an adventure, all right. Like terrorists who have hijacked a passenger airplane. To them, it's all fun, and they could give less than a damn about the unwilling passengers forced to go along on this suicidal joyride. And when this thing crashes and burns, hell, I should say it in reverse, as this thing burns and then later crashes, they're going to be having a fun time all the way down. I mean, we are trapped in a real-life version of the Dark Knight movie. You got the Joker here, with a sign painted on the side of the country that says slaughter is the best medicine. Except there ain't no Batman coming along to save the day. There is no talking reason to these lunatics because they are the voice of their own God. Any criticism to them is immediately dismissed as either coming from people who are jealous or just having no basis altogether. There's no amount of evidence that you're going to pile up for them that's ever going to be good enough. Black people have tried for half a millennium to convince them that racism is wrong. And they've refused to either admit to this pig-simple reality or at the very least to stop practicing racism, white supremacy. Once they've set their eyes on something as being in their interests, to make sure that they don't have to compete, that's it. They have gone on complete radio silence. And there's nothing you can say that's going to wake them up or get them to open their eyes. Forget it. They've gone into cryo-sleep on their way to oblivion. Racism and the white supremacy that it promotes and protects are a mental disorder. It's suicidal narcissism. It's one thing to be addicted to psychological masturbation. It's one thing to be recklessly self-destructive, but when you form your mentality on the basis of psychological masturbation that takes the form of self-destruction, then you have something sick and dangerous. And when you put the majority of the world's power into the hands of these self-destructive psychological masturbators, you've got something truly evil. There's a reason why all the white civilizations, if they can be called that, fell into ruin, never to rise again, whether it was Mesopotamia, Greece, Persia, Rome, Britain, whatever. Their nature sows the seeds of their own destruction. The United States expiration date was written long before the Declaration of Independence was. Their value system is the freaking problem. They destroy everyone and everything, and it's inevitable that this will always come back around to them. They send their violence out into the world, assuring themselves that as they gather land and slaughter people and take their resources and take the people often as slaves, they tell themselves, we're winning, we're winning, we're winning. But this model of destruction always turns back on the ones who sent it out into the world. The problem is that all of us will be forced to share in the dominant society's punishment that ought to fall solely on them, but as I've always told you, there's no such thing as proportionate consequences. Now, black folks, this is where we need to turn the mirror on ourselves, because by refusing to establish our own economy, we have left ourselves without any of the tools necessary to push back this evil. And we've left ourselves open to being punished right alongside the guilty. Black people seem to think that being oppressed by white supremacy absolves us of any responsibility to do anything about white supremacy. And that has been our effective response when we sit here just watching, not doing anything. I suppose we're waiting for it to hurt enough. Why don't we stop white supremacy before it hurts us again? The dominant society's denial of reality directly mirrors our own. They have nothing but reckless abandon going for them, and we have our own version of it. Though we cloak it in piety, we think that there's some guy in the sky who's going to come and save us the same way that he came and saved us from slavery, right? But the truth is, the only one who's going to save you is you. Telling yourself, well, I ain't had nothing to do with all that environmental pollution. That was them white folks. That may help you feel better about having done nothing. But the water and the air that the white people are polluting, that's your water and your air. And you don't have any other source to get it from, so once they screw it up, that's a wrap. You have a duty to defend it. It's yours. Now look, there's no right way to do the wrong thing. And I'm not going to launch into any screeds about, the necessity to buy solar panels or investing in hydroelectric power plants or whatever. Instead, I will tell my brothers this. White supremacy is destroying the world, our world. You think we have the luxury of time to chatter about rappers and which video slut is taking naked photos? Get real. This world is our inheritance, and we're sitting on our hands and just watching as the scum of the earth destroy it. This is about a lot more than stopping race soldiers and the police, or putting an end to gentrification. As Africans, we should literally see ourselves on a mission to save the world, because it is ours. And if this sounds grandiose, then so be it. But again, black folks, if we're going to stop white supremacy, that's going to require power. So rededicate yourself to building your power base that is going to form the network that we're going to use to unite ourselves against this threat. We do not have to be bystanders to our own extinction, but that's what we're going to be reduced to as long as we are content to look around and hope that somebody else is going to do our job. If the planet is yours, then it is your responsibility to save it from the individuals raping it. If someone's raping your wife or your mother, you wouldn't just sit there and say, well, let me look around and see if somebody else is going to do something. You pick up a doggone knife, a gun, a brick, or your bare hands, and you would handle that yourself. This is no different. Nobody's coming to the rescue of Mother Earth except you. The same way that no one's going to come to the rescue of Mother Africa except you. No one knows for sure how much worse this situation is going to get. Climatologists have said that the situation can and will get much worse. Others have already opined that we have passed a tipping point. Whatever the circumstance may be, we as Africans cannot just simply sit back and watch as events play out. We've been doing that for 500 years, and it has been our downfall. When we talk about how we are going to wield power, that means power over the world itself. It does not mean only power over a neighborhood or an individual city or even a state or even a nation. We have to think much broader than that, much bigger than that, to face down all the threats that despoil what is ours. So don't just talk about it. Be about it.